I'm Brittany, this is Mo Run, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Sometimes we read them, and sometimes we read one of my favorites, one of my very favorites, one of my top most impactful. Listen, we're continuing to read Captive Prince today. All right, we're continuing Captive Prince, which does not feel real, feels the opposite of that as I throw the bookmark across my desk. I know what page we're on, though. We are on page 65. I believe we stopped dead on 65. We had to stop in the middle of a, oh my god, I'm right. 64, technically, but you know. We are on page 64, towards the beginning of chapter 3. We usually read about 50 pages, but I'm used to reading very specifically Seven Seas Danmei on this channel, so I know what 50 pages of that formatted book gets me. This seems to be like maybe a little over 50 pages, actually. And we will be reading over 50 pages today. And we'll actually be at like the midpoint. We'll actually be around the middle by the time we finish today. And dear God, what else? I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Janae Henning is here, everybody. Janae Henning is in the chat. She has a lovely channel. You should go check her out. She's a friend of mine. We have talked about The Devil Judge at length together, which you can see most of between her channel and mine. She is a lovely person. She reacts to East Asian shows and reads manga and like all kinds of stuff, which very, very often lands in the queer sphere. So you can see how we kind of overlap. Go follow Janae Henning, everybody. She's delightful. When it comes to Captive Prince, there are trigger warnings in the description. This series has to do with, well, a lot of things, but it mainly features slavery and particularly sexual slavery. So if there's any trope that you can think of or any happening, any what have you, any content that might be potentially triggering to you, there are trigger warnings in the description. They are spoiler free. And avail yourself of them, because as we discovered in the first 64 pages of this book, this series doesn't really pull punches. In fact, I would consider the first 50 pages of this book to be like rent-lowering gunshots. Like, she really... C.S. Picard really came out and was like, this is the price of entry. You can pay it or you can't, or you won't. You can choose not to, but here's what we're getting into, and here's what we're dealing with, which I appreciate. Meat Bun put something a little bit similar in the early pages of Urha that really let you know the kind of stuff that you should be prepared for. So, we are on page 64. We are at the scene break. All right. In a moment of oversight, they forgot the blindfold. The palace was revealed to be a labyrinth in which corridors flowed one into another, and every archway framed a different aspect. Chambers of different shapes, stairs of patterned marble, courtyards that were tiled or filled with cultivated greenery. Some archways, screened by latticed doors, offered no views, only hints and suggestions. Damon was led from passage to passage. Once, they moved through a courtyard with 2 fountains, and he heard the trill of birds. He remembered carefully the route. The guards who accompanied him were the only ones he saw. He assumed there would be security on the perimeter of the harem, but when they stopped in one of the larger rooms, he realized they had passed the perimeter, and he had not even noticed where it was. He saw, with a change in his pulse, that the archway at the end of this room framed another courtyard, and that this one was not as well kept as the others, containing detritus. You know, I don't think I've ever actually heard that word said out loud. Detritus? I think it's detritus? And a series of irregular objects, including a few slabs of unworked stone and a wheelbarrow. In one corner, a broken pillar was leaned up against the wall, creating a kind of ladder. This led to the roof, the convoluted roof, with its obscuring curves and overhangs and niches and sculptings. It was, clear as daylight, a path to freedom. So as not to stare at it like a moonstruck idiot, Damon turned his attention back to the room. There was sawdust on the floor. It was some kind of training area. The ornamentation remained extravagant. Except that the fittings were older and of a slightly rougher quality, it still looked like part of the harem. Probably everything in Vere looked like part of a harem. The cross, Laurent had said. It stood at the far end of the room. The center beam was made from the single straight trunk of a very large tree. The cross beam was less thick, but equally sturdy. Around the center beam was tied a sheaf of quilted padding. A servant was tightening the ties that bound the padding to the beam, and the lacing recalled to mind Laurent's clothing. The servant began testing the strength of the cross by throwing his weight against it. It didn't budge. The cross, Laurent had called it. It was a flogging post. Damon had held his first command at 17, and flogging was a part of army discipline. As a commander and a prince, flogging was not something that he had personally experienced, but neither was it something he disproportionately feared. It was familiar to him as a hard punishment that men, with difficulty, endured. At the same time, he knew that strong men broke under the lash. Men died under the lash. Though, even at 17, death under the lash, why can I not say that phrase? Under the lash, hello, was not something he would have allowed to happen under his command. If a man was not responsive to good leadership and the rigors of normal discipline, and the fault was not with his superiors, he was turned off. Such a man should not have been taken on in the first place. Probably he was not going to die. There was just going to be a great deal of pain. Most of the anger that he felt about this fact he proportioned to himself. He had resisted the provocation to violence exactly because he had known he would end up suffering consequences. And now here he was, for no better reason than that Laurent, possessing a pleasing shape, had left off talking just long enough for Damon's body to forget his disposition. Excuse me. The prose. We're going to relive that. And now here he was, for no better reason than that Laurent, possessing a pleasing shape, had left off talking just long enough for Damon's body to forget his disposition. That's just extremely well phrased and communicated. And I'm a writing nerd. And this whole thing is well written. But just particular moments of effective clarity really, really gets me. Damon was strapped to the wooden post, face first, with his arms spread and shackled to the cross section. His legs were untied. There was enough give in the position to squirm. He would not. The guards tugged on his arms and on the restraints, testing them, positioning his body, even kicking his legs apart. He had to force himself not to struggle against it. It wasn't easy. He could not have said how much time had passed when Laurent finally entered the room. Enough time for Laurent to dry and to dress and to do up all those hundreds of laces. As Laurent entered, one of the men began testing the lash in his hands, calmly, as they had tested all the equipment. Laurent's face had the hard, strapped-down look of a man resolved on a course of action. He took up a position against the wall in front of Damon. From this vantage, he would not be able to see the impact of the lash, but he would see Damon's face. Damon's stomach turned over. Damon felt a dull sensation in his wrists and realized that he had begun unconsciously pulling against the restraints. He forced himself to stop. There was a man at his side with something twined through his fingers. He was lifting it to Damon's face. "Open your mouth." Damon accepted the foreign object past his lips in the moment before he realized what it was. It was a piece of wood, covered in soft brown leather. It was not like the gags or bits that he had been subjected to throughout his captivity. Rather, it was the kind that you give a man to bite down on to help him endure pain. The man tied it behind Damon's head. As the man with the lash moved behind him, he tried to prepare himself. "How many stripes?" said the man. I'm not sure yet, said Laurent. I'm sure I'll decide eventually. You can begin. The sound came first. The soft whistle of air, then the crack, lash against flesh, a split second before the jagged pain ripped at him. Damon jerked against the restraints as the lash struck his shoulders, obliterating in that instant his consciousness of anything else. The bright burst of pain was barely given a moment to fade before the second lash hit with brutal force. The rhythm was ruthlessly efficient. Again and again the lash fell on Damon's back, varying only in the place where it landed, yet that tiny difference grew to have critical importance, his mind clinging to any hope of a fraction less pain, as his muscles bunched and his breathing changed. Damon found himself reacting not only to the pain but to the rhythm of it, the sick anticipation of the blow, trying to steel himself against it, and reaching a point, as the lash fell again and again across the same welts and marks, when that was no longer possible. He pressed his forehead to the wood of the post then and just took it. His body shuddered against the cross, every nerve and sinew strained, the pain spreading out from his back and consuming all his body, then invading his mind, which was left with no barriers or partitions that could hold against it. He forgot where he was and who was watching him. He was unable to think or feel anything other than his own pain. Finally, the blows stopped. Damon took a while to realize it. Someone was untying the gag and freeing his mouth. After that, Damon became aware of himself in stages, that his chest was heaving and his hair was soaked. He unlocked his muscles and tested his back. The wave of pain that washed over him convinced him that it was much better to be still. He thought that if his wrists were released from the restraints, he would simply collapse onto his hands and knees in front of Laurent. He fought against the weakness that made him think that. Laurent. His returned awareness of the existence of Laurent arrived at the same moment he realized that Laurent had come forward and was now standing a single pace away, regarding him, his face wiped clean of any expression. Damon recalled Jocasta, pressing cool fingers against his bruised cheek. I should have done this to you the day you arrived, said Laurent. It's exactly what you deserve. Why didn't you? Damon said. A little roughened, the words just came out. There was nothing left to keep them in check. He felt raw, as though a protective outer layer had been stripped away. The problem was that what had been exposed was not weakness, but core metal. You are cold-blooded and honorless. What held back someone like you? It was the wrong thing to say. I'm not sure, said Laurent in a detached voice. I was curious what kind of man you were. I see we have stopped too early. Again. Damon tried to brace himself for another strike, and something in his mind splintered when it did not immediately come. Your Highness, I'm not certain he'll survive another round. I think he will. Why don't we make a wager? Laurent spoke again in that cold, flat voice. A gold coin says he lives. If you want to win it from me, you'll have to exert yourself. Lost to pain, Damon could not have said for how long the man exerted himself, only that he did. When it was over, he was well beyond further impertinence. Blackness was threatening his vision, and it took all he had to keep it back. It was a while before he realized that Laurent had spoken, and even then, for the longest time, the emotionless voice didn't connect to anything. I was on the field at Marlis, said Laurent. As the words penetrated, Damon felt the world reshape itself around him. They wouldn't let me near the front. I never had the chance to face him. I used to wonder what I'd say to him if I did, what I'd do. How dare any one of you speak the word honor? I know you're kind. A Laurentian who treats honorably with an Aquilin will be gutted with his own sword. It's your countryman who taught me that. You can thank him for the lesson. Thank who? Damon pushed the words out, somehow, past the pain, but he knew. He knew. Damianos, The dead Prince of Aquilos, said Laurent. The man who killed my brother. That would be the end of that chapter. Something about, and I realize this is a wild thing to say, but it's always so mind-blowing to me how the near assault scene, which is gut-wrenching and full of just absolute fear and anxiety and just so physically and psychologically awful. Somehow the way that this scene is rendered, the way that the lashing scene is rendered really draws almost even with how fucked up the near assault was. And I think the one thing that really makes it draw at least very close to level with the near assault, aside from the incredibly effective way that Damon's pain and experience is described as he is being lashed, like quite literally within an inch of his life, is Laurent being positioned in front of him. And not just in front of him. We find out that he's in front of him and that he's not looking at the lashes. He's looking at Damon's face. And that's fucked up enough. That's already a choice that makes you feel a bit sick. But then he steps forward. By the time the lashing has gotten past that first phase, Laurent is like right here, really studying Damon's face in pain. And that, maybe it was the bit of, I guess, more uniqueness, because near assault is, I guess, more familiar as a happenstance rather than a really like fucked up edge to a torture scene, basically. But I don't know, there's something about the lashing scene that seems so uniquely effective for me. Every time I read it, it makes me damn near just as kind of sick to my stomach as the near assault with Gavard. Because C.S. Picard's really good at what they do. Ooh. We are at page 71 for chapter 4. Ow, said Damon through gritted teeth. Be still, said the physician. You're clumsy, poking lout, said Damon in his own language. And be quiet, this is a medicinal salve, said the physician. Damon disliked palace physicians. During the last weeks of his father's illness, the sick room had thronged with them. They had chanted, muttered pronouncements, thrown divining bones into the air, and administered various remedies, but his father had only grown sicker. He felt different about the pragmatic field surgeons who had worked tirelessly alongside the army on campaign. The surgeon who attended him at Marlas had sewn up his shoulder with a minimum of fuss, restraining his objection to a frown when Damon got on a horse 5 minutes later. The Varetian physicians were not of this ilk. It was admonitions. It was admonitions? Yeah. The word's broken up by a sentence break. It was admonitions not to move, and endless instructions and dressings that were continually being changed. This physician wore a gown that reached to the floor and a hat shaped like a loaf of bread. The salve was having absolutely no effect on his back that Damon could discern, though it smelled pleasantly of cinnamon. It was 3 days since the lashing. Damon did not clearly remember being taken down off the flogging post and returned to his room. The blurry impressions that he had of the journey reassured him that he had made the trip upright, for the most part. He did remember being supported by 2 of the guards here in this room. Well, oh damn, someone was nice enough to send me a pronunciation guide. Because I was foolish and thought, I've read this before, finally a book where I'll be familiar with the names. Incorrect, because I have read this book before. I have not pronounced this book before. So there are plenty of names that I have not actually had to speak. And I cannot remember, it's going to take me a second with the pronunciation guide to actually commit that to what my mouth will do. So, pardon. I know Riddell is not correct now. I just need to actually implement that into my brain. While Riddell stared at his back in horror. The prince really did this? Who else? Damon said. Riddell had stepped forward and slapped Damon across the face. It was a hard slap, and the man wore 3 rings on each finger. What did you do to him? Riddell demanded. This question had struck Damon as funny. It must have shown on his face, because a second, much harder slap followed the first. The sting of it momentarily cleared the blackness that was pressing in on his vision. Damon had taken this further hold on consciousness and held to it. Passing out was not something he had ever done before, but it was a day of firsts, and he was taking no chances. Don't let him die yet, was the last thing Laurent had said. The prince's word was law, and so, for the small price of the skin off his back, there were a number of compromises to Damon's imprisonment, including the dubious prerequisite. Oh, I think that's a typo. I think it's supposed to be prerequisite, but this says perquisite, and I don't think that's a word, but I'm writing it down to make sure later. Hello. The dubious prerequisite of regular pokes from the physician. A bed replaced the floor cushions so that he could lie comfortably on his stomach to protect his back. He was also given blankets and various colored silk wraps, though he must use them to cover the lower half of his body only to protect his back. The chain remained, but instead of attaching to his collar, it was locked to one golden wrist cuff to protect his back. The concern for his back also struck him as funny. He was bathed frequently, his skin softly sponged with water drawn from a tub. Afterwards, the servants disposed of the water, which, on the first day, was red. Remarkably, the biggest change was not in the furnishings and routines. It was in the attitude of the servants and the men guarding him. Damon might have expected them to react like Riddell, with animosity and outrage. Instead, there was sympathy from the servants. From the guards, there was, even more unexpectedly, camaraderie. Where the ring fight had positioned Damon as a fellow fighter, being pulverized under the prince's lash had apparently made him one of the fraternity. Even the taller guard, Laurent, who had threatened Damon after the ring fight, seemed to have somewhat warmed to him. Inspecting Damon's back, Laurent had, not without some pride, proclaimed the prince a cast-iron bitch, and clapped Damon cheerfully on the shoulder, turning him momentarily ashen. In turn, Damon was careful not to ask any questions that would earn him suspicion. Instead, he embarked on a determined cultural exchange. Not an idiot, Damon. Not an idiot. He's an idiot in some ways, but he's not an idiot in this way. Was it true that in Achelos... Oh, it's Achelos. That I remembered. Oh, thank you. Was it true that in Achelos they blinded those who looked on the king's harem? No, it wasn't. Was it true that in... Achelos, I got. Achelan? Achelan. Was it true that Achelan women were bare-breasted in summer? Yes, it was. And the wrestling matches were fought naked? Yes. And the slaves also went naked? Yes. Achelos might have a bastard king and a whore queen, but it sounded like paradise to Laurent. Laughter. A bastard king and a whore queen. Laurent's crude apothegm had, Damon discovered, entered common usage. Damon unlocked his jaw and let it pass. Security was relaxing in small increments, and he now knew a way out of the palace. He tried objectively to view this as a fair exchange for a lashing. 2 lashings, his back reminded him tenderly. He ignored his back. He focused on anything and everything else. The men guarding him were the prince's guard and had no affiliation with the regent whatsoever. It surprised Damon how loyal they were to their prince, and how diligent in his service, airing none of the grudges and complaints that he might have expected, considering Laurent's noxious personality. Laurent's feud with his uncle they took up wholeheartedly. There were deep schisms and rivalries between the prince's guard and the regent's guard, apparently. It had to be Laurent's looks that inspired the allegiance of his men, and not Laurent himself. The closest the men got to disrespect was a series of ribald comments. Is it ribald or ribald? That's a good question. Why am I being introduced with so many words that I haven't spoken out loud, actually, today? Comments regarding Laurent's appearance. Their loyalty apparently did not prohibit the fantasy of fucking the prince taking on mythic proportions. Was it true, asked Jord, that in Achielos the male nobility kept female slaves and the ladies fucked men? They don't in Ver? Damon recalled that inside the ring and out of it, he had only seen same-sex pairings. His knowledge of Veretian culture did not extend to the practices of intimacy. Why not? No one of high birth invites the abomination of bastardry, said Jord, matter-of-factly. Female pets were kept by ladies, male pets were kept by lords. You mean that men and women never... Never. Not among the nobility. Well, sometimes if they were perverse. It was taboo. Bastards were a blight, Jord said. Even among the guard, if you screwed women, you kept quiet about it. If you got a woman pregnant and didn't marry her, your career was over. Better to avoid the problem. Follow the example of the nobility and screw men. Jord preferred men. Didn't Damon? You knew what was what with men, and you could spurt without fear. This is such a brilliant, effortlessly just simple and sensical reason for this culture to be the way it is, that it feels like fundamental. It's like you would be hard pressed, at least for me, I'd be hard pressed to come up with a more seamless reason that entirely justifies the sexual attitudes and practices of at least the highborn of this culture. Makes all the sense in the world. Like, duh. Like, maybe I just haven't come across things just as well justified, but boy, I have seen, mostly in straight stuff, but boy, I have seen some shit tried to be, explained away, some like fucked up or interesting parts of a like fictional world building moment, like justified, and it always feels just a little too engineered, being like, oh, well, clearly you wanted this to be a thing in the culture, and then you had to retroactively figure out how to justify it. This just feels, it's just something that, yet another thing that I really admire about this series. Possibly because it's based in very, like, real world knowledge, but flipped on its head. So in medieval or historical spaces, like bastardry was something that people dealt with, but in this culture, it's become such a taboo that in order to just avoid it entirely, they do this instead. Whereas, especially in like medieval aspects and everything, kings just had bastards. Like, that was just a thing that was, rather than actually adapting anywhere around it. They were just like, no, then I'm just going to have sex with who I'm going to have sex with, and I'm just going to have bastards because sure. I will be here all day. Okay. Damon was wisely silent. His own preference was for women. It seemed ill-advised to admit this. On the rare occasions when Damon pleased himself with men, he did so because he was attracted to them as men, not because he had any reason to avoid women or substitute for them. Veretians, thought Damon, made things needlessly complicated for themselves. Here and there, useful information emerged. Pets weren't guarded, which explained the lack of men at the perimeter of the harem. Pets weren't slaves. They came and went as they pleased. Damon was the exception. It meant that once past these guards, it was unlikely he would encounter others. Here and there, the subject of Laurent was raised. "Have you," said George to Damon with a slowly spreading smile. "Between the ring fight and the lashing?" said Damon sourly. "No." "They say he's frigid." Damon stared at him. "What? Why?" "Well," said George, "because he doesn't... I mean, why is he so?" said Damon, cutting off George's prosaic explanation firmly. "Why is snow cold?" said George with a shrug. Damon frowned and changed the subject. Damon was not interested in Laurent's proclivities. Since the cross, his feelings towards Laurent had solidified from prickling dislike into something hard and implacable. It was Laurent, finally, who asked the obvious question. "How'd you end up here, anyway?" "I wasn't careful," said Damon, "and I made an enemy of the king." "Castor? Someone should stick it to that whoreson. Only a country of barbarian scum would put a bastard on the throne," said Laurent. "No offense." "None taken," said Damon. That's a scene break. We're on page 76. On the 7th day, the regent returned from... I'm going to go with Chastillon, but I don't think that's fully right. I can't quite remember what the real answer was in the pronunciation guide, but that's closer than what I was doing before. The first Damon knew of it was the entrance into his room of guards he didn't recognize. They were not wearing the prince's livery. They had red cloaks, disciplined lines, and unfamiliar faces. Their arrival provoked a heated argument between the prince's physician and a new man, one Damon had never seen before. "I don't think he should move," said the prince's physician. Under the loaf of bread, he was frowning. "The wounds might open." "They look closed to me," said the other. "He can stand." "I can stand," Damon agreed. He demonstrated this remarkable ability. He thought he knew what was happening. Only one man other than Laurent had the authority to dismiss the prince's guard. The regent came into the room in full state, flanked by his red-cloaked regent's guard and accompanied by liveried servants and 2 men of high rank. He dismissed both physicians, who made obeisances and vanished. Then he dismissed the servants and everyone else but the 2 men who had entered with him. His resulting lack of entourage did not detract from his power. Though technically he only held the throne in stewardship and was addressed with the same honorific of Royal Highness as Laurent, this was a man with the stature and presence of a king. Damon knelt. He would not make the same mistake with the regent that he had made with Laurent. He remembered that he had recently slighted the regent by beating Gaywatch in the ring, which Laurent had arranged. The emotion he felt toward Laurent surfaced briefly. On the ground beside him, the chain from his wrist pulled. If someone had told him 6 months ago that he'd kneel, willingly, for Varetian nobility, he would have laughed in their face. Damon recognized the 2 men accompanying the regent as Councillor Guillaume. As Councillor Guillaume, Councillor... I can't remember. Audin? I think it might be Audin. It's certainly not Auden. Councillor Guillaume, Councillor Audin. That'll be my attempt. Again, process. Each wore the same heavy medallion on a thick-lined chain, their chain of office. "Witness with your own eyes," said the regent. "This is Castor's gift to the prince, the Achiellan slave," said Audin, in surprise. A moment later, he fished out a square of silk and lifted it to his nose, as if to screen his sensibilities from a front. What happened to his back? That's barbaric. It was, thought Damon, the first time he had heard the word barbaric used to describe anything other than himself or his country. "This is what Laurent thinks of our careful negotiations with Achiellos," said the regent. "I ordered him to treat Castor's gift respectfully. Instead, he had the slave flogged almost to death. I knew the prince was willful. I never thought him this destructive, this wild," said Audin, in a shocked, silk-muffled voice. "There's nothing wild about it. This is a piece of intentional provocation, aimed at me and at Achiellos. Laurent would like nothing better than for our treaty with Castor to founder. He mouths platitudes in public, and in private, this." You see, Audin, said Guillaume, it's as the regent warned us. The flaw is deep in Laurent's nature. I thought he'd outgrow it. Instead, he grows steadily worse. Something must be done to discipline him. These actions cannot be supported, agreed Audin. Well, what can be done? You cannot rewrite a man's nature in 10 months. Laurent disobeyed my order. No one knows that better than the slave. Perhaps we should ask him what should be done with my nephew. Damon did not imagine he was serious, but the regent came forward and stood directly in front of him. Look up, slave, the regent said. My face claim, my casting, by the way, for the regent is almost always Jeremy Irons, and this is probably the Borgias' fault, to be honest. It's probably very much the fault of the show The Borgias, in which he played the Pope. He played the head. He was one of the main. So it's usually Jeremy Irons in my head, in case you wanted another little glimpse into what I'm imagining right now. Oh, come on. Talked myself right off track again. And here I thought I was getting better at that. Damon looked up. He saw again the dark hair and the commanding aspect, as well as the slight frown of displeasure that it seemed Laurent habitually elicited from his uncle. Damon remembered thinking that there was no familial resemblance between the regent and Laurent, but now he saw that this was not quite true. Though his hair was dark and silvered at the temples, the regent had blue eyes. I hear that you were once a soldier, said the regent. If a man disobeyed an order in the Achaean army, how would he be punished? He would be publicly flogged and turned off, Damon said. A public flogging, said the regent, turning back to the two men who accompanied him. That is not possible. But Laurent has grown so unmanageable in recent years. I wonder what would help him. What a shame that soldiers and princes are held to a different accounting. 10 months before his ascension, is it really a wise time to chastise your nephew? Audin spoke from behind the silk. Shall I let him run wild, wrecking treaties, destroying lives, warmongering? This is my fault. I have been too lenient. You have my support, said Guillaume. Audin was nodding slowly. The council will stand behind you when they hear word of this, but perhaps we should discuss these matters elsewhere. Damon watched the men depart. Long-term peace with Achaelos was obviously something that the regent was working hard to bring about. The part of Damon that did not wish to raze to the ground the cross, the ring, and the palace containing them reluctantly acknowledged that goal as admirable. The physician returned and fussed, and servants came to make him comfortable and then departed, and Damon was left alone in his rooms to think about the past. The Battle of Marla 6 years ago had ended with twinned bloody successes for Achaelos. An Achaean arrow, a stray lucky arrow on the wind, had taken the Varetian king in the throat, and Damon had killed the crown prince. Auguste? Shit, I can't remember. It's at the very least closer with Auguste. Oh, crap, no, can't remember. In single combat on the northern front. The battle had turned on Auguste's death. The Varetian forces had quickly fallen into disarray, the death of their prince a staggering, dispiriting blow. Auguste? I was right. Or I was closer anyway. Or Auguste. Oh, hello. Had been a beloved leader, an indomitable fighter, and an emblem of Varetian pride. Auguste! Thank you! Auguste! God, I was... Bleh. Auguste had been a beloved leader, an indomitable fighter, and an emblem of Varetian pride. He had rallied his men after the death of the king. He had led the charge that decimated the Achaean northern flank. He had been the point on which wave after wave of Achaean fighters had broken. Father, I can beat him, Damon had said, and receiving his father's blessing, had ridden out from behind the lines and into the fight of his life. Damon hadn't known that the younger brother had been on the field. 6 years ago, Damon had been 19. Laurent would have been 13? 14? It was young to fight in a battle like Marla's. It was too young to inherit. And with the Venetian king dead and the crown prince dead, the king's brother had stepped in as regent, and his first act had been to call parley, accepting the terms of surrender and ceding to Achilleos the disputed lands of Delpha, which the Venetians called Delfure. It was the reasonable act of a reasonable man. In person, the regent seemed similarly level-headed and sensible, though afflicted with an intolerable nephew. Damon did not know why his mind was returning to the fact of Laurent's presence on the field that day. Oh, it's not Marlas. Or not Marlas. Marla? There was no fear of discovery. It was 6 years ago, and Laurent had been a boy, who by his own admission had been nowhere near the front. Even if that were not the case... now that I know. Marla? Thank you! Oh, look at me. I'm remembering sometimes. Even if that were not the case, Marla had been chaos. Any glimpse of Damon would have been early in the battle, with Damon in full armor, including helm, or if by some miracle he had been seen later, shield and helm lost. By that time, Damon had been covered in mud and blood and fighting for his life, as they all had been. But if he were recognized, every man and woman in Ver knew the name of Damianos, Prince Killer. Damon had known how dangerous it would be for him if his identity were discovered. He had not known how near to discovery he had come, and by the very person who had the most cause to want him dead. All the more reason why he had to get free of this place. "You have a scar," Laurent had said. That's a scene break. "What did you tell the regent?" Riddell demanded. "Has someone told me about that pronunciation and I just missed it? You can tell me again." Riddell, R-A-D-E-L. It's so not Riddell, but I've been remembering kind of others, but cannot remember this to save my life. Rodell? I'm right? No, I'm not right. Riddell? Get out. I'm usually so much better with French pronunciation is the thing. I took a few years of it in high school. "What did you tell the regent?" Riddell demanded. The last time Riddell had looked at him like that, he lifted his hand and hit Damon hard. "You heard me. What did you tell him about the lashing?" "What should I have told him?" Damon gazed back at him calmly. "What you should have done," said Riddell, "is shown loyalty to your prince. In 10 months, he will be king," said Damon. "Until then, aren't we subject to the rule of his uncle?" There was a long, cold pause. "I see it has not taken you long to learn how to make your way here," Riddell said. Damon said, "What has happened?" "You have been summoned to court," said Riddell. "I hope you can walk." With that, a parade of servants entered the room. The preparations that they began eclipsed any Damon had experienced, including those that had been made before the ring. He was washed, pampered, primped, and perfumed. They carefully skirted his healing back, but oiled everywhere else, and the oil they used contained gold pigment, so that his limbs gleamed in the torchlight like those of a golden statue. There are aesthetic choices and specificity, such as this, that blow my mind. And maybe it's because I have difficulty coming up with details like this on my own. It's hard for me to come up with really distinct visual things like this in design, in stuff like oils with flecks of gold. Like, that's stunning. That's beautiful. What do you mean? I struggle to do that. It feels like it takes me a long time. So I would love to hear from C.S. Picot about how long it takes her to suss out details like this, or how she does it. Because it would make me feel better if she too was like, "Oh yeah, like I get there, but I have to struggle for 1,000,000 years before I do." That would be very validating. Because obviously when you read a finished work, it just feels like it just drops out of thin air. Like, sure, oil with flecks of gold so that you can picture a glittering Damon. Sure, of course. A servant approached with a series of 3 small bowls and a delicate brush, and brought his face close to Damon's, gazing at his features with an expression of concentration, the brush poised. The bowls contained paint for his face. He had not had to suffer the humiliation of paint since Achilleus. The servant touched the paint-wet brush tip to his skin, gilt paint to line his eyes, and Damon felt the cold thickness of it on his lashes and cheeks and lips. This time Riddell did not say no jewelry, and 4 enameled silver caskets were brought into the room and thrown open. From their gleaming contents, Riddell made several selections. The first was a series of fine, near-invisible strings, on which hung tiny rubies, spaced at intervals. They were woven into Damon's hair. Then gold for his brow and gold for his waist. Then a leash snapped onto the collar. The leash was gold, too, a fine gold chain, terminating in a golden rod for his handler. The cat carved at one end, holding a garnet in its mouth. Much more of this, and he was going to clank as he walked. But there was more. There was a final piece, another fine gold chain looped between twin gold devices. Damon didn't recognize what it was until a servant stepped forward and snapped the nipple clamps in place. He jerked away, too late, besides which it only took a jab to his back to send him to his knees. As his chest rose and fell, the little chain swayed. "The paint smudged," said Riddell to one of the servants, after assessing Damon's body and face. "There and there. Reapply it." "I thought the prince didn't like paint," said Damon. "He doesn't," said Riddell. Another scene break. It was the custom of the Varetian nobility to dress in subdued splendor, distinguishing themselves from the garish brightness of the pets on whom they lavished their greatest displays of wealth. It meant that Damon, cast in gold and escorted through the double doors at the end of a leash, could be mistaken for nothing but what he was. In the crowded chamber, he stood out. So did Laurent. His bright head was instantly recognizable. Damon's gaze fixed on him. Left and right, the courtiers were falling silent and stepping back, clearing a path to the throne. A red carpet stretched from the double doors to the dais, woven with hunting scenes and apple trees and a border of acanthus. The walls were draped in tapestries, where the same rich red predominated. The throne was swathed in the same color. Red, red, red. Laurent clashed. Damon felt his thoughts scattering. Concentration was keeping him upright. His back ached and throbbed. He forcibly detached his gaze from Laurent and turned it to the director of whatever public spectacle was now about to unfold. At the end of the long carpet, the regent sat on the throne. In his left hand, resting across his knee, he held a golden scepter of office, and behind him, in full robes of state, was the Varetian council. The council was the seat of Varetian power. In the days of King Laurent, the council's role had been to advise on matters of state. Now the regent and council held the nation in stewardship until Laurent's ascension. Comprised of 5 men and no women, the council was arrayed in a formidable backdrop on the dais. Damon recognized Audin and Guillaume. A third man he knew from his extreme age to be Councillor Hérode. Hérode? Possibly. I could be wrong. The others must therefore be Jure and Chalot. Although he could not tell one from the other, all 5 wore their medallions around their necks, the mark of their office. I love French sounds, can I just say. Also on the dais, standing slightly back from the throne, Damon saw Councillor Audin's pet, the child, done up even more garishly than Damon. The only reason Damon outdid him in sheer volume of guilt was because, being several times the little boy's size, he had substantially more skin available to act as canvas. Nauseating, Pacat, thank you! A herald called out Laurent's name and all of his titles. Walking forward, Laurent joined Damon and his handler in their approach. Damon was starting to view the carpet as an endurance trial. It was not just the presence of Laurent. The correct series of prostrations before the throne seemed specifically designed to ruin a week's worth of healing. Finally, it was done. Damon knelt, and Laurent bent his knee the appropriate amount. From the courtiers lining the chamber, Damon heard 1 or 2 murmured comments about his back. He supposed that set against the gold paint, it looked rather gruesome. That, he realized suddenly, was the point. The regent wanted to discipline his nephew, and, with the council behind him, had chosen to do it in public. A public flogging, Damon had said. We're going to pause there, actually, before we get into this, because it's just about 4. We're going to take a break. I try to keep it under 10 minutes, so that's about the time frame you can expect before where the heck is the bookmark? There it is. We are on we're towards the top of page 86. And I am going to go reheat my tea. Oh, by the way, so sorry, I meant to mention this at the top. I am giving away this lovely copy of this volume, the first volume of Captive Prince. You can enter to win this, if you would like, simply by commenting below, like an actual comment on the video, not in the chat, in the actual video. Just let me know that you would like your name to be entered. And the next stream that we do, so on Thursday at the same time, is when I will be taking all of the names from these previous 2 streams down, randomizing them, and then whoever's name pops up on the top of the list wins a copy of this. So that is how that works. And you have until kind of, let's see, the stream is on Thursday. So by Wednesday at midnight, let's say, that is when you can comment either on this stream or the first stream if you missed part of that one and go back to it. Just wherever. Either one's fine. And we'll be right back before we get into what the fuck is about to transpire. So, I'll be right back. Please enjoy the Gaywatch break room. Da, da, da. Welcome back. So, oh God, I can't say anything, but it's all like, man, we're not even halfway through the first book and it's already backing up on me like this. Okay. Oh man. Oh man. Oh man. Oh man. Oh my God, Sundance! Hello. Hi. How are you doing? You've been a patron since forever, but I don't think I at least haven't seen you in a second. Hey. Also, little bit of a regime change. So I'm so used to doing Urha streams that I just busted out Mo Run and not Arthur, who's supposed to be here for Captive Prince. So Arthur is here now. I do not currently have Merlin, but I know where Merlin is. I know what Merlin is. I have not been able to grab him yet. He's on the Amazon wish list that I have made publicly, but he's just kind of been sitting there waiting. So either I'm going to get him or, you know, someone's going to send him to me from the wish list. I don't know, but I do know what I want Merlin to be. But right now we have Arthur and he is here. We are on page 86 towards the top. Uncle, said Laurent. Straightening, Laurent's posture was relaxed and his expression was undisturbed, but there was something subtle in the set of his shoulders that Damon recognized. It was the look of a man settling in for a fight. Nephew, said the regent, I think you can guess why we are here. A slave laid hands on me and I had him flogged for it. Calmly. Twice, said the regent. Against my orders. The second time against the advice that it might lead to his death. Almost it did. He's alive. The advice was incorrect. Again, calmly. You were also advised of my order, that in my absence the slave wasn't to be touched, said the regent. Search your memory. You'll find that advice was accurate, yet you ignored it. I didn't think you'd mind. I know you are not so subservient toward Achielos that you would want the slave's actions to go unpunished just because he is a gift from Castor. The blue-eyed composure was faultless. Laurent, Damon thought with contempt, was good at talking. He wondered if the regent was regretting doing this in public, but the regent did not look perturbed or even surprised. Well, he would be used to dealing with Laurent. I can think of several reasons why you should not have a king's gift beaten almost to death immediately after the signing of a treaty, not the least because I ordered it. You claim to have administered a just punishment, but the truth is different. The regent gestured, and a man stepped forward. The prince offered me a gold coin if I could flog the slave to death. It was the moment when sympathy palpably swung away from Laurent. Laurent, realizing it, opened his mouth to speak, but the regent cut him off. No, You've had your chance to make apologies or give reasonable excuses. You chose instead to show unrepentant arrogance. You do not yet have the right to spit in the face of kings. At your age, your brother was leading armies and bringing glory to his country. What have you achieved in the same time? When you shirked your responsibilities at court, I ignored it. When you refused to do your duty on the border at Delphur, I let you have your way. But this time your disobedience has threatened an accord between nations. The council and I have met and agreed. We must take action. The regent spoke in a voice of unquestioned power that was heard in every corner of the chamber. Your lands of Varennes and Marche are forfeit, along with all troops and monies that accompany them. You retain only Aquitar. For the next 10 months you will find your income reduced and your retinue diminished. You will petition to me directly for any expenses. Be grateful you retain Aquitar, and that we have not taken this decree further. Shock at the sanctions rippled across the assembly. There was outrage on some faces, but on many others there was something quietly satisfied, and the shock was less. In that moment it was obvious which of the courtiers comprised the regent's faction and which Laurent's, and that Laurent's was smaller. Be grateful I retain Aquitar, said Laurent, which by law you cannot take away, and which besides has no accompanying troops and little strategic importance. Do you think it pleases me to discipline my own nephew? No uncle acts with a heavier heart. Should your responsibilities ride to Delphur, show me you have even a drop of your brother's blood, and I will joyfully restore it all. I think there is an old caretaker at Aquitar. Shall I ride to the border with him? We could share armor. Don't be facile. If you agree to fulfill your duty, you would not lack for men. Why would I waste my time on the border when, at Castor's whim, you roll over? For the first time, the regent looked angry. You claim this is a matter of national pride, but you are unwilling to lift a finger to serve your own country. The truth is that you acted out of petty malice, and now you're smarting at discipline. This is on your own head. Embrace the slave in apology, and we are done. Embrace the slave? Anticipation among the gathered courtiers winched tighter. Damon was urged onto his feet by his handler. Expecting Laurent to balk at the uncle's order, Damon was startled when, after a lingering look at his uncle, Laurent approached with soft, obedient grace. He hooked a finger in the chain that stretched across Damon's chest and drew him forward by it. Damon, feeling the sustained pull at twin points, came as he was bid. With cool detachment, Laurent's fingers gathered rubies, inclining Damon's head down far enough to kiss him on the cheek. The kiss was insubstantial. Not a single mote of gold paint transferred itself to Laurent's lips in the process. You look like a whore. The soft words barely stirred the air by Damon's ear, inaudible to anyone else. Laurent murmured, Filthy painted slut. Did you spread for my uncle the way you did for Castor? Damon recoiled violently, and gold paint smeared. He was staring at Laurent from 2 paces away, revolted. Laurent lifted the back of his hand to his cheek, now streaked with gold, then turned back to the regent with a wide-eyed expression of injured innocence. Witness the slave's behavior for yourself, uncle. You wrong me cruelly. The slave's punishment on the cross was deserved. You can see for yourself how arrogant and rebellious he is. Why do you punish your own blood when the fault lies with Achilleos? Move and countermove. There was a danger in doing something like this publicly. And indeed, there was a slight shift of sympathy within the assembly. You claim the slave was at fault and deserved punishment. Very well, he has received it. Now you receive yours. Even you are subject to the rule of regent and council. Accept it gracefully. Laurent lowered his blue eyes, martyring himself. Yes, uncle. He was diabolical. Perhaps this was the answer to how he won loyalty from the prince's guard. He simply wrapped them around his finger. On the dais, the elderly Councillor Hérode was frowning a little and looking at Laurent for the first time with troubled sympathy. The regent ended the proceedings, rose, and departed, perhaps for some awaiting entertainment. The councillors left with him. The symmetry of the chamber broke looked down as courtiers unlocked themselves from their positions on either side of the carpet and began to mingle more freely. "You may hand me the lash," said a pleasant voice, very close. Damon looked up into a pair of limpid blue eyes. Beside him, the handler hesitated. "Why do you delay?" Laurent held out his hand and smiled. "The slave and I have embraced and are joyously reconciled." The handler passed him the leash. Laurent immediately drew the chain taut. "Come with me," Laurent said. Someone made a comment about 4D chess, and yeah, that's the end of the chapter. The 4D chess is one of the countless favorite things that I have about this series. And it is indeed, Henry, kind of the moment on the cover. Not this cover, but this one. This is almost certainly where the cover came from. I mean, you could kind of get to a cover like this naturally. There didn't necessarily need to be a moment in the story to warrant this, you know what I mean? But it is kind of nice that it does come from a specific moment. It does seem to be inspired by a specific moment. That was the end of the chapter. Can't remember if I said that or not. We are on page 91 for chapter 5. It was a little too ambitious of Laurent to think that he could extricate himself easily and discreetly from a court gathering of which his own censure had been the centerpiece. Damon, held at the end of a leash, watched as Laurent's progress was thwarted again and again by those who wished to commiserate. There was a press of silk and cambric and solicitude. For Damon, it was not a reprieve, just a delay. He felt at every moment Laurent's hold on the leash, like a promise. Damon felt a tension that wasn't fear. Under different circumstances, without guards or witnesses, he might relish the chance to be alone in a room with Laurent. Laurent was indeed good at talking. He accepted sympathy gracefully. He put his position rationally. He stopped the flow of talk when it became dangerously critical of his uncle. He said nothing that could be taken as an open slight on the regency. Yet no one who talked to him could have any doubt that his uncle was behaving at best misguidedly and at worst treasonously. But even to Damon, who had no great knowledge of the politics of this court, it was significant that all 5 counselors had left with the regent. It was a sign of the regent's comparative power. He had the full backing of the council. Laurent's faction, left here griping in the audience chamber, did not like it. They did not have to like it. They could do nothing about it. This, then, was the time for Laurent to do his best to shore up support, not disappear off somewhere for a private tete-a-tete with his slave. And yet, despite all of this, they were leaving the audience chamber and moving through a series of interior courtyards large enough to contain trees, geometric greenery, fountains, and winding paths. Across the courtyard, glimpses of the continuing revelry could be seen. The trees moved, and the lights from the entertainment across the way winked brightly. They were not alone. Following at a discreet distance were 2 guards for Laurent's protection, as always. And the courtyard itself was not empty. More than once they passed couples promenading on the paths, and once Damon saw a pet and courtier twining around one another on a bench, sensuously kissing. Laurent led them to an arbor, vine-bowered. Beside it was a fountain and a long pool tangled with lilies. Laurent tied Damon's leash to the metalwork of the bower, as he might tie a horse's lead to a post. He had to stand very close to Damon in order to do it, but gave no sign that he was bothered by the proximity. The tether was nothing more than an insult. Not being a dumb animal, Damon was perfectly capable of untying the leash. What kept him in place was not the thin golden chain casually looped around the metal. It was the liveried guard and the presence of half the court, and a great many men besides that, between him and freedom. Laurent moved off a few steps. Damon saw him lift a hand to the back of his own neck, as if to release tension. Saw him do nothing for a moment but stand and be quiet and breathe the cool air scented with night flowers. It occurred to Damon for the first time that Laurent might have his own reasons for wanting to escape the attention of the court. The tension rose, surfacing, as Laurent turned back to him. You don't have a very good sense of self-preservation, do you, little pet? Bleeding to my uncle was a mistake, said Laurent. Because you got your hand slapped, said Damon. Because it's going to anger all those guards you've taken so much trouble cultivating, said Laurent. They tend to dislike servants who place self-interest above loyalty. Expecting a direct assault, he was unprepared for one that came at him obliquely, sideways. He set his jaw, let his gaze rake up and down Laurent's form. You can't touch your uncle, so you lash out where you can. I'm not afraid of you. If there's something you're going to do to me, do it. You poor, misguided animal, said Laurent. Whatever made you think I came here for you? Damon blinked. Then again, said Laurent, maybe I do need you for one thing. He wound the thin chain once around his wrist, and then with a sharp jerk he snapped it. The two ends slithered away from his wrist and dropped, dangling. Laurent took a step backwards. Damon looked at the broken chain in confusion. Your Highness, said a voice. Laurent said, Councillor Heraud. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, began Heraud. Then he saw Damon and hesitated. Forgive me, I assumed you would come alone. Forgive you, said Laurent. A silence opened up around Laurent's words. In it, their meaning changed. Heraud began, Then he looked at Damon, and his expression grew alarmed. Is this safe? He's broken his leash. Guard! There was the shrill sound of a sword drawn from a sheath. 2 swords. The guards pushed their way into the arbor and interposed themselves between Damon and Heraud. Of course. You've made your point, Heraud said with a wary eye on Damon. I hadn't seen the slave's rebellious side. You seem to have him under control in the ring, and the slaves gifted to your uncle are so obedient. If you attend the entertainments later, you'll see that for yourself. I've seen them, said Laurent. There was a little silence. You know how close I was to your father, said Heraud. Since his death, I have given my loyalty unswervingly to your uncle. I'm concerned that in this case it may have led me to make an error of judgment. If you're concerned that my memory for wrongs against me is longer than 10 months, said Laurent, there's no need for anxiety. I am sure you can persuade me you were genuinely mistaken. Heraud said, Perhaps we can take a turn in the garden. The slave can avail himself of the garden seat and rest his injuries. How thoughtful of you, Counselor, said Laurent. He turned to Damon and said in a melting voice, Your back must hurt terribly. It's fine, said Damon. Kneel on the ground, then, Laurent said. A hard grip on his shoulder forced him down. As soon as Damon's knees hit the ground, then a sword was held to his throat to dissuade him from rising. Heraud and Laurent were disappearing away together, just one more couple wandering the perfumed garden paths. It's a scene break. The revelry across the way began to spill out into the garden, and steadily its population increased, and lanterns were hung, and servants began to wander about with refreshments. The place where Damon knelt remained reasonably out of the way, but occasionally courtiers passed him and remarked on him. Look, there is the prince's barbarian slave. Frustration curled in him like a lash. He was once again tied up. The guard was less nonchalant about restraining him than Laurent. He was chained to the metal bower by his collar, and this time it was a real chain, not something he could snap. Little pet, thought Damon with disgust. From Heraud's fraught exchange with Laurent, he picked the only salient piece of information. Somewhere inside, not far away, were the other Achelan slaves. Damon's mind returned to them. His concern for their well-being persisted, but their proximity raised perturbing questions. What was the provenance of these slaves? Were they palace slaves trained by Adrastus, and brought as Damon had been, directly from the capital? Held in solitary confinement aboard the ship, Damon had not yet seen the slaves, nor had they seen him. But if they were palace slaves, hand-picked from the best of those who served royalty in Achelos, there was a chance that they would recognize him. In the unfolding quiet of the courtyard, he heard the soft chime of small bells. Chained up in an obscure part of the garden, away from the courtly entertainments, it was just sheer bad luck that one of the slaves was brought to him. On the end of a leash, led by a Varetian pet. The slave wore a petite version of Damon's gold collar and wrist cuffs. The pet was the source of the bells. He was belled like a cat at his throat. He was wearing a great deal of paint, and he was familiar. It was Councillor Audin's pet, the child. Damon cheerlessly supposed that to those susceptible to little boys, this pet probably had charms in abundance. Under the paint he had a child's fine, clear skin. If his features had been possessed by a girl of the same age, they would have promised, given half a dozen years, a superlatively beautiful young woman. A learned grace disguised, for the most part, the limitations of his undersized child's limbs. Like Damon, he had precious stones woven into his hair, though in his case they were seed pearls, glinting like stars in a tumble of brown curls. His best feature was a pair of amazing blue eyes, unmatched by any Damon had ever seen, except for the ones he had recently been staring into. The boy's pretty bow lips formed the shape of a kiss, and he spat right into Damon's face. "My name is Nicaise," he said. "You're not important enough to slight me. Your master had all his land and money taken away. Even if he hadn't, you're just a slave. The regent sent me to find the prince. Where is he?" "He went back to the audience chamber," Damon said. To say that he was taken aback by Nicaise was an understatement. The lie just came out. Nicaise stared at him. Then he tugged brutally on the slave's leash. The slave was wrenched forward and almost overbalanced, like a colt on overlong legs. "I'm not going to drag you around all night. Wait here for me." Nicaise tossed the slave's leash onto the ground and turned on his heels, bells chiming. Damon lifted his hand to his wet face. Instantly, the slave was on his knees beside him, and a soft hand was on his wrist, drawing it back. "Please, let me. You will smudge the paint." The slave was looking right at him. Damon saw no recognition in his face. The slave simply left the hem of his tunic and used it to dab gently at Damon's cheek. Damon relaxed. He thought, a little ruefully, that it was probably arrogant of him to have assumed that the slave would know him. He supposed that he looked rather unlike a prince, in gold shackles and gold paint, chained to an arbor in the middle of a Venetian garden. He also felt sure that this slave was not from the palace in Achelous. Damon would have noticed him. The slave's coloring was eye-catching. His skin was fair, and his curling light brown hair was burnished with gold. He was exactly the type that Damon could have drawn down onto the sheets and spent a very pleasant couple of hours enjoying. The slave's careful fingers touched his face. Damon felt a moment of obscure guilt for having sent Nicaise off on a wild goose chase, but he was also glad for this unexpected moment alone with a slave from his homeland. "What's your name?" said Damon, softly. "Erasmus." "Erasmus. It's good to talk to another Achelan." He meant it. The contrast between this demure, lovely slave and the spiteful Nicaise made him crave the straightforward simplicity of home. At the same time, Damon felt a throb of concern for the Achelan slaves. Their sweet-natured obedience was hardly a blueprint for survival in this court. Damon guessed Erasmus to be about 18 or 19, yet he would be eaten alive by 13-year-old Nicaise, let alone Laurent. "There was a slave who was kept drugged and bound aboard the ship," Erasmus said tentatively. From the first he had spoken Achelan. "They said he was given to the prince." Damon nodded slowly, answering the unspoken question. As well as tousled light brown curls, Erasmus had a pair of the most hopelessly artless hazel eyes Damon had ever seen. "What a charming picture," said a woman's voice. Jerking back from Damon, Erasmus instantly prostrated himself, pressing his forehead to the ground. Damon stayed where he was. Kneeling and shackled was quite submissive enough. The woman who had spoken was Van. She was strolling the garden paths with two noblemen. One of the men had a pet with him, a red-haired youth whom Damon also faintly recognized from the ring. "Don't stop on our account," said the redhead, tartly. Damon glanced sideways at Erasmus, who hadn't moved. It was unlikely that Erasmus could speak Venetian. His master laughed. "Another minute or two, and we might have caught them kissing." "I wonder if the prince could be persuaded to have his slave entertained with the others," said Van. "It's not often you get to see a really powerful male perform." It was a shame to pull him out of the ring before he had a chance to mount anyone. "I'm not sure I'd care to watch him after what we saw tonight," the master of the redhead spoke. "I think it's more exciting now that we know he's really dangerous," said the redheaded pet. "It's a shame his back is ruined, but the front is very nice," said Van. "We saw more of it at the ring, of course. As for the danger, Councillor Guillaume suggested that he wasn't trained to perform as a pleasure slave, but training isn't everything. He might have natural talent." Damon was silent. To react to these courtiers would be madness. The only possible course of action was to stay quiet and hope they would grow bored and drift off. And that was what Damon was determinedly doing, when the one thing happened that was guaranteed to make any situation spectacularly worse. "Natural talent," said Laurent. He strolled into the gathering. The courtiers all bobbed respectfully, and Van explained the subject under consideration. Laurent turned to Damon. "Well," Laurent said, "can you couple adequately, or do you just kill things?" Damon thought that given the choice between the lash and a conversation with Laurent, he might actually choose the lash. "He's not very talkative," remarked Van. "It comes and goes," said Laurent. "I'd happily perform with him." It was the pet with the red hair. Ostensibly, he spoke to his master, but the words carried. "Ansel, no, he could hurt you." "Would you like that?" said the pet, sliding his arms around his master's neck. Just before he did so, he glanced sideways at Laurent. "No, I wouldn't," his master frowned. But it was obvious that Ansel's provocative question had been aimed not at his master, but at Laurent. The boy was angling for royal attention. Damon was sickened by the idea of some nobleman's boy offering himself up to be hurt on the assumption that it would play to Laurent's taste. Then he thought of all he knew of Laurent and only felt sicker because, of course, the boy's assumptions were probably correct. "What do you think, Your Highness?" said Ansel. "I think your master would prefer you intact," said Laurent dryly. "You could tie the slave up," said Ansel. It was a testament to Ansel's lacquered skill that it came out teasing and seductive rather than what it was, a last attempt of a climber to catch and hold the prince's attention. It almost didn't work. Laurent seemed unmoved by Ansel's flirtatiousness, even bored by it. He had tossed Damon into the ring, but in the sex-drenched atmosphere of the stands, Laurent's pulse had not even appeared to flicker. He had been singularly immune to the carnality of what the Venetians called performance, the only courtier without a pet fawning all over him. "They say he's frigid," Jord had said. "What about something small, while we wait for the main entertainment?" said Van. "Surely it's past time for the slave to learn his place." Damon saw Laurent absorb those words, saw him stop and give the idea his full attention, turning the decision over in his mind. And saw him make it, his mouth curling, his expression hardening. "Why not?" said Laurent. "No," said Damon, a surge in his chest, half stymied as he felt hands on him. Fighting in earnest against armed guards in front of witnesses and in the middle of a crowded court was an act of self-destruction, but his mind and body rebelled, dragging instinctively at the handling. A lover's bench nestled inside the bower, creating two curved semicircles. The courtiers made themselves at ease on it, occupying one side. Van suggested wine, and a servant was fetched with a tray. One or two other courtiers wandered over, and Van struck up a conversation with one of them about the embassy from Patras. Patras? It might be Patras. Watch it be like Patra. Due to arrive in a few days. Damon was lashed to the seat on the other side, facing them. There was an air of unreality about what was happening. Ansel's master was delineating the encounter. The slave would be tied up and Ansel would use his mouth. Van protested that it was so rare for the prince to agree to a performance, they should make the most of it. Ansel's master would not be swayed. This was really going to happen. Damon gripped the metalwork of the bower, his wrists cuffed to it above his head. He was going to be pleasured for a Venetian audience. He was probably just one of a dozen discreet entertainments that would unfold in this garden. Damon's eyes fixed on Ansel. He almost told himself that this was not the pet's fault, except that, in large part, it was. Ansel dropped to his knees and found his way into Damon's slave garments. Damon looked down at him and could not have felt less aroused. Even under the best of circumstances, green-eyed, red-haired Ansel was not his type. He looked about 19, and though he was not the obscene youth of Nicaise, his body was delicately boyish. His beauty was in fact polished, self-conscious prettiness. Pet, thought Damon. The word fit. Ansel pushed his long hair to one side, and began without any formality. He was practiced, and manipulated Damon expertly with mouth and hands. Damon wondered if he should feel sympathetic or pleased that Ansel was not going to have his moment of triumph. Not even half-hard under Ansel's ministrations, Damon doubted he would be able to come for the pleasure of an audience. If there was anything explicit on view, it must be the absence of all desire to be where he was. There was a faint rustle, and, cool as the water beneath the lily, Laurent came to sit beside him. "I wonder if we can do better than this," Laurent said. "Stop." Ansel detached himself from his endeavor and looked up, lips wet. You're more likely to win a game if you don't play your whole hand at once, said Laurent. Start more slowly. Damon reacted to Laurent's words with inevitable tension. Ansel was close enough for Damon to feel his breath, a hot, focused cloud of heat that rolled in place, a susurration over sensitive skin. Like this? Ansel asked. His mouth was an inch from its destination, and his hand slid softly up Damon's thighs. His wet lips parted slightly. Damon, against his will, reacted. Like that, said Laurent. Shall I? Said Ansel, leaning forward. Don't use your mouth yet, said Laurent. Just your tongue. Ansel obeyed. He tongued the head, an elusive touch, barely the suggestion of itself. Not enough pressure. Laurent was watching Damon's face with the same cerebral attention that he might apply to a strategic problem. Ansel's tongue pressed into the slit. He likes that. Do it harder, said Laurent. Damon swore, a single Achiellan word. Unable to resist the flickering lures being played across its flesh, his body was awakening and beginning to crave rhythm. Ansel's tongue curled lazily around the head. Now lick him, the whole length. Cool words preceded a long, hot lick, wet from base to tip. Damon could feel his thighs tighten, then, minutely, spread, his breath quickening in his chest. He wanted out of the restraints. There was a metallic sound as he pulled against the cuffs, his hands fists. He turned towards Laurent. It was a mistake to look at him. Even in the shadows of evening, Damon could see the relaxed arrangement of Laurent's body, the marmoreal perfection of his features, and the detached unconcern with which he gazed at Damon, not bothering to so much as glance down at Ansel's moving head. If you believed the prince's guard, Laurent was the impregnable citadel and took no lovers at all. Right now, Laurent gave the impression of a mind somewhat engaged, and a body wholly aloof, untouched by ardor. The ribald fancy of the prince's guard held a kernel of plausibility. On the other hand, the aloof, untouched Laurent was at this moment delivering a precise treatise on cocksucking. And Ansel obeyed instruction, his mouth doing what it was told. Laurent's commands were leisurely, unhurried, and had the refined practice of suspending his engagements at the very moment they began to get interesting. Damon was used to taking pleasure where he wished, touching where he wanted, coaxing responses from his partners as he pleased. Frustration peaked as gratification was stymied, relentlessly. Every part of him suffused with thwarted sensation, the cool air over his hot skin, the head in his lap just one part of a whole that included the awareness of where he was and who was sitting beside him. Push down on it, Laurent said. Damon felt the breath release shatteringly from his chest at the first long, wet slide down onto his cock. Ansel couldn't quite take it all, though his throat was exquisitely trained, lacking a gag reflex. Laurent's next order came like a tap on the shoulder, and Ansel drew obediently back up to do no more than suckle the head. Damon could hear the sound of his own breathing now, even over the clamoring of his flesh. Even without rhythmical attention, diffuse pleasure was beginning to coalesce into something more urgent. He could feel the shift, the orientation of his body towards climax. Laurent uncrossed his legs and rose. Finish him off, said Laurent, incidentally, and without a backwards glance, returning to the other courtiers to make a few remarks about the subject currently under discussion, as though he had no particular need to see out the conclusion, now that it was inevitable. The image of Ansel absorbing his erection was joined in his fragmenting thoughts by the sudden harsh desire to get his hands on Laurent's body and exact revenge, both for his actions and for his airy absence. Orgasm rolled up like flame over a hot surface, stripping out seed that was, professionally, swallowed. A little slow in the beginning, but quite a satisfactory climax, said Van. Damon was unshackled from the lover's seat and pushed back down onto his knees. Laurent was seated opposite, legs crossed. Damon's eyes fixed on him and looked nowhere else. His breathing was still noticeable and his pulse rapid, but anger produced all the same effects. The musical sound of bells intruded on the gathering. Nicaise interrupted without any sign of deference to those of higher rank at all. "I'm here to speak to the prince," said Nicaise. Laurent lifted his fingers minutely, and Van, Ansel, and the others took it as a signal to make a brief obeisance and depart. Nicaise came to stand in front of the bench and stared at Laurent with an expression of hostility. Laurent, for his part, was relaxed, one arm spread out over the back of the bench. "Your uncle wants to see you." "Does he? Let's make him wait." One pair of unlikable blue eyes stared at another. Nicaise sat down. "I don't mind. The longer you wait, the more trouble you'll be in." "Well, as long as you don't mind," said Laurent. He sounded amused. Nicaise lifted his chin. "I'm going to tell him you waited on purpose." "You can if you like. I just assume he'd guess, but you can save him the effort. Since we're waiting, shall I call for refreshments?" He gestured to the last of the tray-bearing servants, who stopped his retreat and approached. "Do you take wine, or aren't you old enough yet?" "I'm 13. I drink whenever I like." Nicaise scorned the tray, pushing at it so hard it almost overbalanced. "I'm not going to drink with you. We don't need to start pretending politeness." "Don't we? Very well. I think it is 14 by now, isn't it?" Nicaise turned red under the paint. "I thought so," said Laurent. "Have you thought about what you're going to do after? If I know your master's taste, you have another year at most. At your age, the body begins to betray itself." And then, reacting to something in the boy's face, "Or has it started already?" The red grew strident. "That isn't any of your business." "You're right. It isn't," said Laurent. Nicaise opened his mouth, but Laurent continued before he could speak. "I'll offer for you, if you like, when the time comes. I wouldn't want you in my bed, but you'd have all the same privileges. You might prefer that. I'd offer." Nicaise blinked and then sneered. "With what?" A breath of amusement from Laurent. "Yes, if I have any land left at all, I may have to sell it to buy bread, never mind pets. We will both have to navigate the next 10 months on the tips of our toes." "I don't need you. He's promised. He's not going to give me up." Nicaise's voice was smug and self-satisfied. "He gives them all up," said Laurent, "even if you're more enterprising than the others have been." "He likes me better than the others." A scornful laugh. "You're jealous." And then it was Nicaise's turn to react to something he saw in Laurent's face, and he said, with a horror Damon didn't understand, "You're going to tell him you want me." "Oh," said Laurent. "No, Nicaise, no. That would wreck you. I wouldn't do that." Then his voice became almost tired. "Maybe it's better if you think that I would. You have quite a good mind for strategy, to have thought of that. Maybe you will hold him longer than the others." For a moment it seemed as if Laurent would say something else, but in the end he just stood up from the bench and held his hand out to the boy. "Come on, let's go. You can watch me get told off by my uncle." That's the end of the chapter. We are on page 109 for chapter 6. "Your master seems kind," said Erasmus. "Kind?" said Damon. The word was difficult to get his mouth around, grating in his throat as he pushed it out. He looked across in disbelief at Erasmus. Nicaise had trailed off hand in hand with Laurent, leaving Erasmus behind, his leash forgotten on the ground beside him where he knelt. A soft breeze shifted his fair curls, and above them foliage moved like an awning of black silk. "He cares for your pleasure," explained Erasmus. It took a moment for those words to attach to their correct meaning, and when they did, a breath of helpless laughter was the only possible response. Laurent's precise instructions and their inevitable result had not been intended as a kindness, but rather the opposite. There was no way to explain Laurent's cool, intricate mind to the slave, and Damon didn't try. "What is it?" said Erasmus. "Nothing. Tell me, I wished for news of you and the others. How is it for you, so far from home? Are you well treated by your masters? I wondered, can you understand their language?" Erasmus shook his head at the last question. "I have a little skill with... patron? Patron. Patron. With patron and the northern dialects. Some words are similar." Haltingly, he said a few of them. Erasmus managed the Varetian well enough. That was not what made Damon frown. The words Erasmus had been able to decipher from what had been said to him were, "Silence, kneel down, don't move." "Did I misspeak?" said Erasmus, misinterpreting the expression. No, you spoke well, Damon said, though his consternation remained. He didn't like the choice of words. He didn't like the idea that Erasmus and the others were rendered doubly powerless by an inability to speak or understand what was being said around them. You do not have the manner of a palace slave, offered Erasmus, hesitantly. That was an understatement. No one from Achilleos would mistake Damon for a body slave. He had neither the manner nor the physique. Damon regarded Erasmus thoughtfully, wondering how much to say. I was not a slave in Achilleos. I was sent here by Castor as punishment, he said, eventually. There was no point lying about that part of it. Punishment, said Erasmus. His gaze dropped to the ground. His whole manner changed. Damon said, But you were trained in the palace? How long were you there? He couldn't account for the fact that he had not seen this slave before. Erasmus attempted a smile, rallying himself from whatever had disheartened him. Yes, but I never saw the main palace. I was in training silks until I was chosen by the keeper to come here, and my training in Achilleos was very strict. It was thought... That is, said Damon. Erasmus blushed and said in a very soft voice, In case he found me pleasing, I was being trained for the prince. Were you? Said Damon, with some interest. Because of my coloring. You can't see it in this light, but in daylight my hair is almost blonde. I can see it in this light, said Damon. He could hear the approval saturating his own voice. He felt it shift the dynamic between them. He might as well have said, good boy. Erasmus reacted to the words like a flower inclining towards sunlight. It didn't matter that he and Damon were technically the same rank. Erasmus was trained to respond to strength, to yearn for it and submit to it. His limbs subtly rearranged themselves, a flush spreading on his cheeks, his eyes dropping to the ground. His body became a supplication. The breeze toyed irresistibly with a curl that had tumbled over his forehead. The line, Erasmus reacted to the words like a flower inclining towards sunlight, has always been one of my favorites. And that whole paragraph of description, really, is just such beautifully effective prose. It's so elegant without being purple. It's so vivid without being overly wordy. It's just beautiful. But just that image, that perfect image that it communicates in your head of reacting to words like a flower inclined towards sunlight is just perfection. In the softest little voice, he said, This slave is beneath your attention. In Achilleos, submission was an art, and the slave was the artisan. Now that he was showing his form, you could see that Erasmus was surely the prize pick of the regent's gift slaves. Ridiculous that he was being dragged around by the neck like an unwilling animal. It was like possessing a finely tuned instrument and using it to smash shells open, misusing it. By the way, I have another face claim. I have another personal casting in Captive Prince. Erasmus, to me, for several reasons, has really just implanted itself in my brain as Troye Sivan. He should be in Achilleos, where his training would be feted and prized. But it occurred to Damon that Erasmus might have been lucky in being chosen for the regent, lucky in never having come to the attention of Prince Damianos. Damon had seen what had happened to the closest of his personal slaves. They had been killed. He pushed the memory forcibly out of his mind and returned his attention to the slave in front of him. Damon said, And is your own master kind? This slave lives to serve, said Erasmus. It was a formulaic set phrase and meant nothing. The behavior of slaves was tightly prescribed, with the result that what was unsaid was often more important than what was said. Damon was already frowning a little when he chanced to look down. The tunic Erasmus wore had been slightly disordered when he had used it to wipe Damon's cheek, and he'd had no chance to right it. The hem had lifted high enough to expose the top of his thigh. Erasmus, seeing the direction of Damon's gaze, quickly pulled the cloth down to cover himself, stretching it as far as it would go. What happened to your leg? Said Damon. Erasmus had gone ivory white. He didn't want to answer, but would force himself to because he'd been asked a direct question. What's wrong? Erasmus's voice was barely audible, his hands clutching the hem of his tunic. I'm ashamed. Show me, said Damon. Erasmus's fingers loosened, trembling, and then slowly lifted the fabric. Damon looked at what had been done. At what, 3 times, had been done. The regent did this. Speak freely. No, on the day we arrived, there was a test of obedience. I failed. This was your punishment for failure. This was the test. I was ordered not to make any sound. Damon had seen Varetian arrogance and Varetian cruelty. He had suffered Varetian insults, had endured the sting of the lash and the violence of the ring, but he had not known anger until now. I forgot about this. I forgot about this. It's all coming back to me now. Oh, the problem with my brain is that I love this series so much, and there have literally been periods in my life where I have studied it for like weeks on end. But my brain being what it is, everything still with enough time kind of fades to the background of, oh, I know I love this character, I know I love that character, but I forget what their thing is. I forget why, largely, outside of just very general vibes and bits of like personality that I may or may not remember. So I forgot this. I remember Erasmus being lovely, but I forgot his thing. You didn't fail, said Damon. That you tried at all proves your courage. What was asked of you was impossible. There's no shame in what happened to you. Except for the people who had done this. That was not a line of dialogue. There was shame and disgrace on every one of them, and Damon would hold them to account for what they had done. Damon said, Tell me everything that has happened to you since you left Achielos. Erasmus spoke matter-of-factly. The story was disturbing. The slaves had been transported aboard the ship in cages below deck. Handlers and sailors alike had taken liberties. One of the women, worried about the lack of access to any usual means of preventing pregnancy, had tried to communicate the problem to her Varetian handlers, not realizing that to them illegitimate birth was a horror. The idea that they might be delivering a slave to the regent with a sailor's bastard growing in her belly caused them to panic. The ship's physic? Had given her some sort of concoction that induced sweats and nausea. Concerned it would not be enough, her stomach was beaten with rocks. That was before they docked in Vere. In Vere, the problem was one of neglect. The regent had not taken any of the slaves to bed. The regent was a largely absent figure, busy with affairs of state, served by pets of his own choosing. The slaves were left to their handlers and to the vagaries of a bored court. Reading between the lines, Damon could tell that they were treated as animals, their obedience a parlor trick, and the tests thought up by the sophisticated court, which the slaves struggled to perform, were in some cases truly sadistic, as in the case of Erasmus. Damon felt sick. You must crave freedom more than I do, said Damon. The slave's courage made him feel ashamed. Freedom, said Erasmus, sounding scared for the first time. Why would I want that? I cannot. I am made for a master. You were made for better masters than these. You deserve someone who appreciates your worth. Erasmus flushed and said nothing. I promise you, said Damon, I will find a way to help you. I wish, said Erasmus. You wish? I wish I could believe you, said Erasmus. You talk like a master, but you are a slave like I am. Before Damon could reply, there was a sound from the paths, and, as he had done once before, Erasmus prostrated himself, anticipating the arrival of another courtier. Voices from the path. Where's the regent's slave? Back there. And then, rounding the corner, there you are. And then, and look who else they let out. It was not a courtier. It was not petite, malicious, exquisite Nicaise. It was coarse-featured, broken-nose Gaywatch. He spoke to Damon, who had last faced him in the ring in a desperate grapple for purchase and mastery. Gaywatch casually clasped the back of Erasmus's gold collar and dragged him up by it, as an uncaring owner might heft a dog around. Erasmus, a boy, not a dog, choked violently as the collar dug into his tender throat, caught at the join of neck and jaw just above the Adam's apple. "Shut up," Govard, irritated by the coughing, slapped him hard across the face. I forgot about this too! Fuck! Shit. Fucking... I remember the opening pages of this extremely well for fairly obvious reasons. But I forgot about this. Ooh. Damon felt the jerk of restraint as his body hit the limits of his chains, heard the metallic sound before he even realized he'd reacted. Let him go. You want me to? He shook Erasmus by the collar for punctuation. Erasmus, who had understood shut up, was wet-eyed from the brief choking, but silent. Don't think I will. Got told to haul him back. No one said I couldn't enjoy myself on the way. Damon said, if you want another go-around, all you have to do is take a step forward. It would please him a great deal to hurt Govard. I'd rather fuck your sweetheart, said Govard. The way I figure it, I'm owed a fuck. As he spoke, Govard pushed up the slave tunic, revealing the curves beneath. Erasmus didn't struggle when Govard kicked his ankles apart and lifted his arms up. He let himself be manhandled, and then stayed in position, awkwardly bent over. The realization that Govard was going to fuck Erasmus right here in front of him hit with the same sense of unreality that he'd felt when faced with Ansel. It wasn't possible that something like this was going to happen, that this court was so depraved that a mercenary could rape a royal slave a scant distance from the gathered court. There was no one within hearing distance except for the disinterested guard. Erasmus's face, red with humiliation, was turned determinedly away from Damon. The way I figure it, Govard used this phrase again, your master's the one who fucked us both. He's the one who should really be getting it. But in the dark, one blonde's as good as another. Better, said Govard. Stick your cock in that frigid bitch, he'd freeze it off. This one likes it. He did something with his hand under the bunched-up tunic. Erasmus made a sound. Damon jerked, and this time the harsh metallic noise suggested loudly that the ancient iron was about to give. The sound of it shook the guard loose from his post. There's some problem? He doesn't like me fucking his little slave friend, said Govard. Erasmus, mortifyingly exposed, looked like he was silently breaking down. Fuck him somewhere else, then, the guard said. Govard smiled. Then he pushed Erasmus hard in the small of the back. I will, Govard said. Shoving Erasmus ahead of him, he disappeared along the paths, and there was absolutely nothing Damon could do to stop him. There's a scene break. And there's a very short bit here before the next scene break. Night turned to morning. The garden entertainments ended. Damon was deposited back in his room, clean and tended and chained and powerless. That's another scene break. Kind of like how you remember, well, I shouldn't say you, kind of like how I always remember, obviously, how unbelievably gay Kirk and Spock are in the original trilogy and the original trilogy's movies. I obviously know this very well. I had a whole channel about it. I've written, I think, literally hundreds of thousands of words of meta about it, dissecting every single second of many episodes. And yet, whenever I return to that series, it's like you get hit with it all over again. And despite knowing perfectly well how overwhelming the gay is with those two, watching it again, you don't remember exactly the heights of gay that are achieved. Similarly, every time I come back to Captive Prince, despite knowing somewhere in my soul how hard it hits and how good it is at doing everything that it does, you forget just how hard it hits. somehow. I don't know what that phenomenon is. Maybe it's just the ADHD, but... Laurent's prediction regarding the reaction of the guards, and the servants, and all the members of his retinue, turned out to be stingingly accurate. Laurent's household reacted to collusion with the regent with anger and enmity. The fragile relationships Damon had managed to build were gone. It was the worst possible time for a change in attitude. Now, when those relationships might have brought him news or been able, in some small way, to influence the treatment of the slaves. He had no thought of his own freedom. There was only the constant pull of concern and of responsibility. To escape alone would be an act of selfishness and betrayal. He could not leave, not if it meant abandoning the others to their fate. And yet he was totally without power to effect any change in their circumstances. Erasmus was right. His promise to help was an empty one. Outside his room, several things were happening. The first was that, in response to the regent's edicts, the prince's household was being cut back. Without access to income from his various estates, Laurent's retinue was substantially diminished and his spending curtailed. In the whirlwind of changes, Damon's room was moved from the royal pet residences to somewhere inside Laurent's wing of the palace. It didn't help him. His new room had the same number of guards, the same pallet, the same silks and cushions, the same iron link in the floor, though this one looked newly installed. Even short of funds, Laurent didn't seem inclined to skimp on security for his Achelan prisoner. Unfortunately. From snippets of overheard conversation, Damon learned that elsewhere, the delegation from... I gotta look that up. Hang on. Patras, Petra... I can't tell if Petra sounds particularly accurate to the whole French thing, or if it seems, like, stereotypical and low-key insulting to the French thing. The delegation from Patras had arrived to discuss trade with Ver. Patras bordered on Achielos and was a country of similar culture, not traditionally an ally of Ver. The news of talks concerned him. Was the delegation here simply to discuss trade, or was it part of some larger shift in the political landscape? He had about as much luck finding out the business of the patron delegation. Oh, as far as you know, it is Patras. Patras sounds a bit more right, actually. That's right, because it's not French. If it's closely related to Achielos, then it's more, Greek. He had about as much luck finding out the business of the patron delegation as he had in helping the slaves, which was to say, not at all. There had to be something he could do. There was nothing he could do. To face his own powerlessness was awful. He had at no point since his capture truly thought of himself as a slave. He had played lip service to the role at best. He had viewed punishments as no more than minor obstacles, because this situation in his mind was temporary. He had believed that escape was in his future. He still believed that. He wanted to be free. He wanted to find his way home. He wanted to stand in the capital, raised on its marble pillars, and look out over the greens and blues of mountains and ocean. He wanted to face Castor, his brother, and ask him, man to man, why he had done what he had done. But life in Achielos went on without Damianos. These slaves had no one else to help them. And what did it mean to be a prince if he did not strive to protect those weaker than himself? The sun, sinking low in the sky, brought light into his room through the grilled windows. When Riddell entered, Damon begged an audience with the prince. Oh. The moment you really fall in love with Damon. Ooh. It was already the first big boon. I mean, other than just generally just rooting for Damon because of, you would root for Damon. Damon is a likable, admirable character. But then he finds out more about the slaves of his people and their situation, and he no longer feels the desire to escape on his own, because that would be shameful to just leave them. He has that sense of leadership responsibility for them, and that's already admirable. But then to spell it out as what did it mean to be a prince if he did not strive to protect those weaker than himself? valid-ass man right here. In love with this valid-ass man. That was a scene break. I don't know if I mentioned. Riddell, with obvious relish, refused. The prince, said Riddell, did not care to trouble himself with a turncoat Achelan slave. He had more exalted business to attend to. Tonight there was a banquet in honor of the patron ambassador. 18 courses, and the most talented pets entertaining with dance and games and performance. Knowing patron culture, Damon could only imagine the reaction of the delegation to the more inventive entertainments of the Venetian court, but he stayed silent as Riddell described the glory of the table and the courses in detail, and the wines, mulberry wine and fruit wine, and, Sinopel? Damon was not fit for that company. Damon was not fit to eat the leavings from the table. Riddell, having made his point at satisfactory length, left. Damon waited. He knew that Riddell would be obliged to pass on the request. He had no illusions about his relative importance in Laurent's household, but if nothing else, his inadvertent role in Laurent's power struggle with his uncle meant that this request for an audience would not be ignored. Would probably not be ignored. He settled in, knowing that Laurent would make him wait. Surely not longer than a day or two, he thought. That was what he thought. And so, when night came, he slept. Another scene break. He woke amid crushed pillows and disturbed silken sheets to find that Laurent's cool blue gaze was on him. The torches were lit, and the servants who had lit them were withdrawing. Damon moved, silk, skin warm, slid away completely to pool among the cushions as he pushed himself up. Laurent paid it no attention. Damon recalled that a visit from Laurent had woken him from sleep once before. It was closer to dawn than sunset. Laurent was dressed in court clothes, having come, presumably, after the 18th course and whatever nightly entertainments had followed. Not drunk, this time. Damon had expected a long, excruciating wait. There was slight resistance from the chain as it dragged across the cushions, following his movement. He thought about what he had to do, and why he had to do it. Very deliberately, he knelt and bowed his head, and lowered his eyes to the floor. For a moment, it was so quiet that he could hear the flames from the torches fluttering in the air. "This is new," said Laurent. "There's something I want," said Damon. "Something you want." The same words, precisely enunciated. He had known it was not going to be easy. Even with someone else, not this cold, unpleasant prince, it would not be easy. "You get something in return," said Damon. He set his jaw as Laurent slowly paced around him, as though simply interested in viewing him from all angles. Laurent stepped mincingly over the chain that lay slack on the ground, completing his tour. "Are you misguided enough to try to bargain with me? What could you possibly offer that I would want?" "Obedience," said Damon. He felt Laurent react to that idea. Subtly but unmistakably, the interest was there. Damon tried not to think too much about what he was offering, what it would mean to keep this promise. He would face that future when he came to it. "You want me to submit. I'll do it. You want me to publicly earn the punishment that your uncle won't let you mete out. Whatever performance you want from me, you'll have it. I will throw myself on the sword. In exchange for one thing. Let me guess. You want me to take off your chains, or reduce your guard, or put you in a room where the doors and windows are unbarred. Don't waste your breath." Damon forced the anger down. It was more important to be clear. "I don't think the slaves in your uncle's care are well treated. Do something about it, and the bargain is made." I forgot about this development, too. Holy shit! "The slaves," Laurent said, after a slight pause, and then, with renewed drawling scorn, "Am I supposed to believe that you care about their welfare? How exactly would they be treated better in Achelos? It is your barbaric society that forced them into slavery, not mine. I would not have thought it possible to train the will out of a man, but you have managed it. Congratulations. Your show of compassion rings false." Damon said, One of the handlers took a heated iron from the fire to test whether the slave would obey an order to stay silent while he used it. I don't know if that is usual practice in this place, but good men don't torture slaves in Achielos. Slaves are trained to obey in all things, but their submission is a pact. They give up free will in exchange for perfect treatment. To abuse someone who cannot resist. Isn't that monstrous? Damon continued. Please. They're not like me. They're not soldiers. They haven't killed anyone. They're innocent. They will serve you willingly. And so will I, if you do something to help them. There was a long silence. Laurent's expression had changed. Finally, Laurent said, You overestimate my influence over my uncle. Damon began to speak, but Laurent cut him off. No, Laurent's golden brows had drawn slightly together, as though he had encountered something that did not make sense. You would really sacrifice your pride over the fate of a handful of slaves? He had worn the same look on his face at the ring. He was gazing at Damon as though he was searching for an answer to an unexpected problem. Why? Anger and frustration broke free of their bonds. Because I am stuck here in this cage and I have no other way to help them. He heard the rage lash in his voice and tried to force it down, with limited success. His breathing was uneven. Laurent was staring at him. The little golden frown was etched deeper. After a moment, Laurent gestured to the guard at the door and Riddell was summoned. He arrived presently. Without taking his eyes off Damon, Laurent said, Has anyone been in or out of this room? No one but your staff, your highness, as you ordered. Which of the staff? Riddell recited a list of names. Laurent said, I want to speak to the guards who are watching over the slave in the gardens. I'll send for them personally, said Riddell, departing on the errand. You think this is a trick, said Damon. He could see from the assessing look on Laurent's face that he was right. The bitter laughter just came out. Something amuses you, said Laurent. What would I have to gain from... Damon broke off. I don't know how to convince you. You don't do anything without a dozen motives. You lie even to your own uncle. This is a country of deviousness and deception. Whereas pure Achielos is free of treachery. The heir dies on the same night as the king, and it is merely coincidence that smiles on Castor, said Laurent silkily. You should kiss the floor when you beg for my favor. Of course Laurent would invoke Castor. They were alike. Damon forcibly reminded himself of why he was here. I apologize. I spoke out of turn. Grittily. Laurent said, If this is a fabrication, if I find you have been moonlighting with emissaries for my uncle, I haven't, said Damon. The guard took a little longer to rouse than Riddell, who presumably never slept, but they arrived reasonably promptly, dressed in livery and looking alert, rather than, as might be expected, yawning and trailing bed linen. I want to know who spoke with the slave the night you watched over him in the gardens, said Laurent. Nicaise and Fan I know about. That was it, came the answer. There was no other. And then, as Damon felt a sick sensation in his stomach, No, wait. Oh? After you left, the guard said. He got a visit from Gaywatch. Laurent turned back to Damon, blue eyes like ice. No, said Damon, knowing Laurent believed this now to be some scheme of his uncle's. It's not what you think. But it was too late. Shut him up, said Laurent. Try not to leave any new marks. He's caused enough trouble for me as it is. That's the end of the chapter. So close! So close! Oh, shit. That is where we are ending for today. We are now about halfway through. The first book goes pretty quickly, actually. The first book is, I believe, the shortest one. It doesn't even reach 300 pages. It doesn't. So you get through it pretty quickly, which is wild considering, for lack of a better word, how well the story is told. Like, the pacing in this trilogy is a bit ridiculous. So, like, this is the shortest book of the series, and we're just barely under halfway through, actually. And we've already gotten such a rich depiction of this world that we are in, and Damon as a character, and we've been introduced to so many new people and so many new things, but rather seemingly effortlessly. We all know it's not without a shit ton of effort on C.S. Picot's part. But geez, and like, it just pulls you through. It is crazy how this book just pulls you through it. You have to know more. You have to read more. It's just masterful. I swear to freaking God. We're on page chapter 7, which I did not say the page number. Page 126 for chapter 7. And we will be here on Thursday to read more. I am trying to find the best places where I can say things, but we have to get past certain things first before we can have, like, certain discussions. Oh my God, that's like the vaguest thing I've ever said. But I'm dying. I'm clawing my face off. We'll get there. We'll get there. First book is the shortest one in the trilogy. We'll get there. And very soon. Because we're already on page, like, 200. We're in the early 200s. Oh, no, excuse me. I'm sorry. We're on page, like, 126, right? So, we'll get there. I also can't remember when certain big things are, developed and revealed and all that jazz. So, I don't know when I'll be able to explode about things. God, this is difficult. Okay. That is it for today. I will see you guys on Thursday at the same time for more of Captive Prince. It is just as good as I remember it. It again, we'll be here all day. Anyway, I'll catch you guys in a couple of days to read more. I hope you're having a time, to put it mildly. And please take care of yourselves as we progress through this week. I hope you had a good start to it, and I hope the rest of it takes you through just beautifully. Please have a very good week. I love you very much. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in a couple of days.